Hello, welcome to Michigan Planning Today. I'm Bob Gibbs, your host, and today we are pleased to have Phil McKenna as our guest speaker today. Phil, welcome to Michigan Planning Today.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for coming.
Good to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I think the reason you have me on your new show, and congratulations, by the way, on your new show,
Thank you.
Is that I'm a community planning consultant, and I have been one for the past 50 years. And so I graduated from Eastern Michigan University with a master's degree in urban planning and community planning. And I had, for the past 30 years, from 1986 to 2016, I was the owner of McKenna Associates Incorporated, which was for a period of 20 years and still is the largest planning consulting firm in Michigan.
Yeah, McKenna Associates, the firm you founded, really I think is the largest planning firm in the state, and it's sort of the go-to firm, I think, for many communities and developers in the real estate market here.
Well, thank you. That's nice. That's nice to hear. In 2016, I was fortunate enough to sell the firm to one of my long-term employees, John Jackson, and he continues to operate the firm today.
Phil, I think you're generally considered the father of Michigan planning. You've probably represented more communities than any other single person in our state's history. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your experience in Michigan?
Well, I'm not the father of it. We all succeed. We all work on the basis of those who went before us. And when I started in planning in 1969 as a planning consultant, there were two firms, Parkins Rogers in Detroit and Phillip Lehman in Southfield. And those two guys, or four guys, Parkins, Rogers, Phillip and Lehman, Chuck Lehman's still alive today, they were the dominant planning consulting firms, and they sort of invented it. They dominated the field at that time. The other thing at that time was that the federal government, through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which had recently been established, had kickstarted or subsidized community planning throughout the United States. And so most of the funds to fund me and my associates in municipalities, large and small, came from the federal government through two programs. One, a redevelopment program, and the other one was long-range community planning called 701. And so that was the basis then. And then, in 1973, 4 years into my career as a planning consultant, President Nixon ended the programs, froze all the funds. He restored part of it with the community development block grant funds, which are still in existence to today, even though greatly diminished. So my question was to myself as a young planner starting out in a new career, have I learned something for which there's no market or no way to fund it? Would local governments fund community planning, long-range thinking ahead? They did. They have, and they continue to. By then there was a constituency established of public officials and planning commissions, which had been formed all over the state, formed mostly by my predecessors in the 50s and 60s, some in the 40s and 20s, as early as 1920. But planning had been declared legal and was established to some degree back in 1969.
Can you tell our viewers what urban planning is?
That was something my mother-in-law went to her grave without ever really knowing what it was. She would send me pictures of tall buildings and things and said, is this urban planning? My kids would go to school. What does your daddy do? They had a hard time explaining it, and so they'd come home and ask me. But community planning is an activity on the part of governments usually, to local governments at the local level, to try to forecast the conditions of their physical plant and to some extent the social activity of the community, the community facilities, its land, its public land, its private land, its buildings, its fire stations, its schools, to plan for all of that. And of course, you try to think ahead. We don't say predict. We might say forecast in some areas of population and markets and the economy and so forth. But usually we work off what's existing and try to come up with a plan that solves some of the problems, solves all of the problems maybe. It depends on what the community wants to do, because you do all of this in concert with the community. And then you arrive at a plan which guides decisions that mayors, city councils, departments, fire departments, police departments, engineering departments, recreation departments of municipalities, what decisions they have to make every day. And so they use this plan, especially for the big decisions.
Yeah. So how far out do communities plan?
I think we used to plan for about 30 years. But now, since the pace of change has accelerated so much, I would say that, you know, it's maybe it's pointless to plan that far out. I mean, you need to think long term, much longer term, but today probably 10 years.
And communities, in their master plans, they look at land use and roads and parks and everything?
Yes, it's called a comprehensive plan. There's the state, it's all permitted. Local governments, and not only in Michigan, but in I think all states are created by an act of the state legislature. They derive their powers and authorities from the state legislature. Their authority to govern, to set speed limits, and to tax, all that. So it comes from the state government. So it says comprehensive plan, master plan. So it takes in land use, your house, where you live, where the retail stores go, where the factories go, where various other uses like community facilities and school, where should they go? What's the appropriate location and relationship to the streets? Of course, they have to consider all of the underground too, the water, the sewer, cable TV. And so it's comprehensive. So it includes almost everything. And so planners are generalists. They have to know something about many, many, many things. And the biggest job they have usually is communicating this to their constituents, who are, first of all, as a planning consultant, are public officials, elected, appointed, and then certainly through the residents of the community.
Do any plans really stick out and that were really noteworthy that you worked on that had a big impact on local communities?
Well, over the years we did many, many, many plans, and I get asked that question now and then. We had, and plans are done at different scale. They might be, a master plan would be for the whole entire community. We've done master plans for Pontiac, for Southfield, and for many other communities in the Detroit area and the state of Michigan primarily, some also in Ohio. But the ones that really stand out are the smaller scale plans for neighborhoods, for streets. You and I worked on, I think, on a downtown plan for Bay City couple decades ago, I guess. Right? It's memorable.
Sure.
And that plan has been very successful. A neighborhood plan that we worked on, I think you participated in that too, was in Midland Street on the west side of Bay City, which evolved from a neighborhood shopping center to an entertainment district, and now I think it's evolving into a discount retail district. So things change all the time, so those plans stand out.
Must be very rewarding to drive around the state and see different communities that you've had a hand in and to see how they've evolved.
It is satisfying in a way. The frustrating part of planning is it's long range, and at first you're doing plans, but they're for the future. So it takes a while to see the evolution of your ideas and the ideas of your constituents, the public and the public officials. But yeah, it is satisfying. I drive around the state of Michigan with my wife and say, who do you think the planner is here? Now, she always knows the answer because I don't ask her the question unless it's one of our communities, which I don't know how many we've had. We've probably had 300 or 400.
Yeah. Have you planned anything in the Upper Peninsula?
We recently did, yes. Not too much. Again, I'm in a competitive field. And so I don't want to suggest there's any bias toward downstate in the UP, but they have a tendency to hire local firms up there, as does the west side of the state, which we recognize. But we coordinated or partnered with a firm headed up by Pat Coleman that you have worked with also.
In
up
Marquette,
and we did in Marquette, we just wrote their new form-based code for that college town of Marquette. So that one we're quite proud of. Years ago, we worked on the Ontonagon Harbor feasibility as to whether it was feasible to redredge that harbor that was for the Army Corps of Engineers.
So in today's political climate of strong property rights and small government, is it legal and can communities legally enforce plans and zoning? How does that work?
Yes, it's as I indicated earlier, local governments are empowered to plan, and then from there they go to a more detailed program, zoning, and so that is permitted under state law. And there are many court cases. Sometimes this gets litigious between the local government and the property owner. And the courts have long upheld the power of local governments to regulate land use.
Why is it a good idea for communities to have master plans and zoning? How does that help the small family and the business owner?
One of the strengths of the United States is that has been the certainty of property rights. And many people came to the United States. Immigrants came here over the decades because back home in Europe, the king or the prince or the duke or the landlord could deprive them of their property after all their labor and hard work and their house and so forth.
Could take it away.
Could take it away, absolutely take it away. So it was always shaky. But in the United States, we have certainty of title. Thomas Jefferson, when he laid out the Northwest Ordinance, which divided the land up in Michigan, made sure that people would have certainty of title. So certainty of your value, the value you've created, is very important.
Predictability.
So, predictability, yes. Uncertainty. You hear it all the time. And the uncertainty of the stock market makes everybody nervous. If you are certain that your efforts will be rewarded and safeguarded, you will maintain, you will improve your property, you will expand it, you will add value to it. You would add value to the community. You would add value to the community's tax base. So it's very important that people who own property, who own land, who own buildings, they have a certainty of what's coming.
So if I bought a house or built a house on a piece of property, I could see what the master plan is and the zoning around my property, And I would have the certainty that if the master plan said it's a residential area, there wouldn't be a fast food restaurant or a factory built across the street from me, because the zoning code and the plan would protect that.
Correct. Well
So
said.
that's
Yes.
important.
That's very important, and yeah, not to say that it can never change, but it will not be changed arbitrarily, and the courts protect that. If somebody did put a slaughterhouse or some obnoxious use right next to your house, you could go to court and seek damages, and in such an outrageous case, I think clearly you would recover what you had lost.
Several years ago, we worked on a community in Alaska, and the prior mayor had removed all zoning and all the planning department, and gave everybody right to build whatever they wanted to, which was fine
That
until
may be a popular thing in some communities, yes.
until a fast food restaurant was proposed across the street from the mayor's house, and she said, that's not really a good idea. How do I protect this? So
Yeah,
she
right.
wanted to have the zoning back in place. I noticed you mentioned a form-based code. What's a form-based code?
Well, a form-based code, and you're the expert in this, so I should be asking you what the form-based code is. But as I understand it, form-based code, as opposed is more detailed. It's a zoning ordinance. It's a code. It's an ordinance. It's a law. Can be enforced by the local government, and it is usually by the building official or the zoning administrator, really by the chief executive. But many zoning ordinances said you can only put a single-family home on this site, and they specified how far it would have to be set back and so forth. For example, in a form-based code, you get into much more detail. You might add that consistent with the character of the community, all the roofs have to be pitched at a minimum degree of slope.
Okay.
That you cannot put. You cannot put vehicular doors in the front of the building. The front of the building has a relationship to the street that is pedestrian, that you're trying to maintain and achieve a walkable environment. So you specify more detail other than just saying, place a store here or place a house. And you could also provide for mixed use. Maybe it wouldn't be all single-family homes. I notice Minneapolis has just abolished their single-family residential district, which, after a long study, I hope, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, some communities will adopt a form-based code that will regulate the shape of the building and the location of the building, but they'll let the developer determine what goes inside the building, whether it be apartments or condominiums or retail shops or something. I noticed that you have AICP after your name. What is planning? Can anybody be a professional planner, and is it an actual profession? Do you have to go to college and be certified?
You don't have to be certified, but it's to do certain activities. You have to be AICP. There are many in Michigan. There are graduate schools and undergraduate schools of planning, notably the University of Michigan, at Wayne State University, Michigan State University, Eastern Michigan University, and almost all of the colleges, even places like Western and Northern and so forth, Central, have a planning type program. So to be AICP, which is a national certification, the American Planning Association supervises this. So to make sure to set a standard for minimum qualifications for a planner, and it requires education plus experience plus passing a national exam plus continuing education. So those are fairly strict standards for planners. Now, planners are comprehensive planners, and so they have backgrounds perhaps in geography, in architecture, in civil engineering, in sociology and economics. And then they may have a master's degree in planning. They may be landscape architects starting out, I think, as you were.
I'm a landscape architect.
And so, it's a diversified experience field. So during my career in the early, I think in the 70s, a national certification was set up so that planners, minimum standards are established and maintained throughout your career. Now, can you work in a planning department without being a certified planner? Absolutely, yes. There's a need for geographers. Planners depend upon sociologists and economists, social psychologists, civil engineers, traffic engineers, transportation engineers, so on. Try to put all of this together, build a consensus on the kind of future that we would like to have.
And AICP stands for what?
American Institute of Certified Planners.
And that's a national organization.
Yes, national. It's headquartered in Washington, D.C. Its major offices are in Chicago.
So we're planners and urban planners. How do we protect the environment and the natural resources in the state?
Well, built into the plan, one of the changes over the last decades has been a better appreciation and a better planning for the environment, for our water, for our soils. Now, this all grew out of several movements, but it is a major part. In fact, many communities will have sub-area plans for watersheds, for example, for the river and the streams that go through their community. Many of which have been covered up. They may not even see them, but they're being daylighted. And so plans are made to protect the air quality.
The woodlands.
The woods. Woodland ordinances are fairly common in Michigan.
The wetlands.
Wetlands, certainly. Revolutionary legislation passed in the 80s to protect Michigan's remaining wetlands, what's left of them, and forests and woods. And the environment has become the major force.
Can communities adopt ordinances to protect woodlands and trees and wetlands and natural systems?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. If you, before you can build on your land, you have to make sure that your proposed plans do not encroach upon the identified wetlands, do not encroach upon areas that need to be protected and they are protected under state law. If you violate that, if you just take a bulldozer and go in and wipe out all the trees, there are substantial fines and even imprisonment can be enforced. So it can be enforced.
I see.
And it is.
And
it is every day.
The courts uphold the zoning
and
planning.
Yes, they do. Yes.
Have you? Well, we're broadcasting in Bloomfield. Have you worked in any communities in the Oakland County, Bloomfield area?
We've done work in almost every Oakland County community.
Wow.
In Beverly Hills, I was the planning consultant. I went to almost all the planning board meetings there for I think it was 18 years. And in Birmingham, you and I worked together on many plans there over the past 25 years. Let's see what else. In West Bloomfield, we've done a lot of planning. I don't know about Bloomfield Township. But I think we've done some work in Bloomfield Township.
What's the future of urban planning going to be? How is it going to change in the next generation?
Well, it is changing rapidly now. There's several major trends that have to do with the rise of technology, the concern for the environment. Much of our careers has seen urban sprawl, the spreading out of land uses into the countryside, and unfortunately the abandonment, frankly, of the central cities. Now that is being reversed to some extent. And so central cities are viewed by the younger generations as the key place to live. So that's a major trend, and one that is certainly satisfying anyway, long overdue.
We're seeing that here in Michigan. We're seeing
yes.
the millennials and empty nesters moving into the cities again.
Yes, Yes, so that's a major trend. And I don't think it will, we need to improve the schools in central communities, but certainly that's a huge change.
Have you found planning to be a rewarding career?
I find it very satisfying. I found it very satisfying. And when we go to employ young people coming out of college and they're trying to decide a career, and then I ask current employees, why do you like this? They say the variety. Every day it is something different, is something new, it's a different place, it's a different issue, it's a different land use, it's a different community. So that's from a planning consultant point of view. And the same thing, most planners work for municipalities as employees. Consulting planners work for 50 or 100 communities, work for a firm that works for a variety of communities. So I found it I've been over much of the Western world, even though we've done consulting in the Ukraine, of all places, 30 years ago, when they were transforming from a state economy to a private sector. So we've traveled around the world, and certainly the Midwest.
Well, Phil, thank you very much for being our first guest on our program tonight.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
And is there anything else you'd like to say to local communities about planning?
Well, I would say this. One of the major trends during my career, the last 30 years or longer, has been the increasing participation of the public, rather than a group of officials getting in a room and over several meetings forecasting the future and planning it. We go out to the community in very important ways. So perhaps half the budget, in some cases, half the master plan budget is consulting with all of what we call the stakeholders, the residents, the schools, the power companies, the elected officials, the department heads, and other agencies that affect the plan from the state and so forth. So I would say get involved.
Really? So the community gets involved in the master plan. It's just not done by the politicians and the planning board. The actual residents and stakeholders get involved.
Public meetings are held. Public hearings are held. We have the technology of cable television and social media. All of those are... We have, on our staff, we have full-time communication people, just so that these are sort of subtle ideas. That's why it's hard for people to understand what urban planning is. It's quite subtle. And so to communicate that is very, very important. But I would say to residents of these fine communities to stay involved and keep involved. And there is a high degree of participation in these communities. And so I would say keep going.
Thank you again, Phil. It's a great honor to have you on our first show.
It's an honor to be here.
And thank you very much for joining Michigan Planning Today. I'm Bob Gibbs, and until next time, thank you.